Hey everyone, so crazy day today. I wanted to just drop a note here. ASML came out with inadvertently with some poor guidance, and so the semiconductor area is getting a little bit of hit. In the community, I was telling people to sell their November call spread, so that's good. We did that, and so no semiconductor positions on right now. Actually, we do. We're short some Micron puts, cash secured puts, which I have rolled a little bit because we had that strike threatened at the 105 level. Let's take a look at that one here. So Micron around 102, I rolled it out to the 95 in the following month. It bounced back a little bit, but it's pulling back a little bit with the weakness in general semiconductor action that we're seeing today. So interesting play because I think the market was just kind of relentlessly rallying and it was looking for some excuse to kind of prick that bubble that was kind of happening, this sort of short-term bubble that was kind of plowing through all this worry that we're seeing in the VIX and in rate vol, in gold vol, in oil vol, not as much in credit vol, but just like the fear level gauges are kind of still very, very elevated, which is unusual for stocks at all-time highs that keep making all-time highs. And so we've sort of had stocks kind of pushing forward in the face of this sort of underlying worry, whether it's about the election or Iran, Israel, and other things. We're not exactly sure what it is, but certainly we've seen rate vol really, really back up later. So I'm going to show you guys a little bit of what's been happening. So back in August, of course, you guys know I've been saying everything's fine in the economy, and sure enough, the number of rate cuts that they were expecting has completely not completely unwound, but to a great deal has really been backpedaled a little bit here. So not anticipating as deep of a rate cut scenario. And so, that's kind of, that's okay. I think the markets can generally do well if we accept that there's going to be a little bit of inflation. It's not going to go to 1% anytime soon. We're going to have a little bit of inflation, growth numbers, spending numbers, retail, everything, all the stuff we look at, travel numbers, et cetera, even as small as, Broadway ticket bookings, everything just really solid. And so, things look pretty good out there. So if we get a little bit of inflation, decent growth, and basically, people employed, well, that's a pretty good backdrop for stocks. In fact, you don't want things too extreme one way or another. We don't want high inflation. We don't want super low inflation. We don't want crazy growth. We don't want no growth. We're kind of sitting in that Goldilocks scenario of the porridge is just kind of warm enough to keep markets, I think, generally happy. Now, we're going to get situations like today where you have something concerning happen. We had SMCI, now we have ASML. So that sort of tech semiconductor narrative may run into a little bit of a wall here. I think it still probably runs up into the end of the year. But right now, what we have is actually kind of a bit of broadening happening. We sort of have the S&P pulling back on some bigger names. Microsoft just hasn't been acting that great lately. Meta, a little bit of a pullback, but near all-time highs. Amazon still pretty fine. So we have a few things pulling back out there, but a lot of things looking pretty good. Home Depot acting well, McDonald's, home builders doing quite well, which is kind of interesting considering we're not going to get the massive rate cuts that we expected, and they're kind of bouncing. So I think that's sort of an interesting play. I don't know if there's a ton of fuel left in that trade. I'm not ready to play the home builders just yet. I think it's interesting to see what's going on. Visa finally pulling back a little bit. So, it's a bit of a mixed bag today. And so they've just given the market a little bit of a reason to sell off here. Now, one play we had in the community was we've been long the Palo Alto because I think, I don't think you can necessarily go that wrong with cybersecurity over the long run. Of course, we can see that even a stock like this can have massive moves. But the world is not getting any safer, and we're never going to solve this problem of cybersecurity issues. It's just, it's an endless cycle of cops and robbers chasing each other, and it'll never be solved. There's no finish line to this particular problem. which is good from the perspective of revenues for companies like this because it's endless revenues, right? So we've had this really, really wonderful run. We were in at 320 on this stock. Then we had a big pop into earnings, scalped some calls, so we made some nice money on some calls. So did some call sales, came in there. And then, of course, when this started to happen, we just said, you know what, it's hands off at this point. Remember, a good option seller knows when not to sell options, right? So that is one of the keystones. That is one of the key features in the Cash Flow Insider system and even in Crush the Premium, is that there's a time to let the market do the work for you, and there's a time where you help the market out because it's struggling. In this case, we didn't have any call selling going on here, and we let this thing run right up. So it's at 373. We came right to these old levels from back in February, from the previous earnings result, and boom, I sold out the 390 calls, November 7th calls. I want to get those in ahead of the earnings date. So we're going to scalp a little bit there, and then I'm going to decide what to do. But basically, instead of selling calls and grabbing a few dollars here and there, we grabbed a nice $50 move plus some calls. We've actually done better than the stock. And that's how you do it with call selling. You look for opportunities. I'm not saying it always works out this perfectly, but that's how you do it. You look for opportunities to add value via call selling and put selling when it makes sense. And then when it's time to step out of the way, you do it. So that was kind of a cool little trade there. I want to show you guys an MSTR setup. I've been talking about MSTR. We had that really nice big trade a few weeks ago. And so when the stock got up here, it sort of had a really, really good run versus Bitcoin. It's the best Bitcoin proxy out there, right? It tends to have this massive beta and a life of its own at times. One of those kind of cultish type stocks, but very, very high beta to Bitcoin itself. So it got up here at 176, made some good money on this trade. We made 226%. I was upset because we could have made 400%, but it is what it is. And so I put on this 1x2 put spread, bought the 176 in October, sold 2 of the 162s. And so let's take a look at what that looks like. It looks like this, right? So you create this tent, I put it on for a 60-cent credit. And I want to go through this sort of process because I think it's kind of an example of how this thing, it hasn't quite collapsed yet, but it's starting to collapse. And this trade may work out absolutely perfectly as designed. And the reason I'm going to tell you that is because when you put on these 1x2s, you don't necessarily want the stock to collapse right away because eventually you'll just end up owning the stock, which I'm comfortable with, right? I basically put on this structure where I'm going to own MSTR at 147 unless it stays above 147. And at the time, the stock was 176. So I have this big $30 tent in which I can make money. Worst case scenario, I own it at a level that really kind of makes sense to me. Let's bring up the chart on MSTR. Here's MSTR versus Bitcoin. So look at this outperformance, massive outperformance there. Now let's take a look at MSTR. Here it is. It had this amazing run from the low 120s all the way up to 220. And so I looked at this and I said, you know what, I kind of still like this trade. I think Bitcoin's kind of firming. I think maybe I'm going to look for a financed upside call spread. So selling some sort of out of the money put, buying maybe an upside call spread. The skew is pretty juicy, not crazy juicy, but nice enough to give yourself an extra wide spread. So you're going to get paid nicely for having sold that upside call against your long call. Very, very favorable when you have that nice steep upside skew. So my thinking was, I'm going to look at Bitcoin itself. Okay, Bitcoin's acting well. It's kind of hanging in there, and it's starting to maybe, start to coil a little bit. And in my mind, it's coiling at a very interesting level. Sure, it could just get crushed to the downside, but to me, because of all the other things that I've talked about in my other videos, money supply, et cetera, why not? Why not Bitcoin? Everything else has gone bananas. So I just feel like it's preparing for some sort of move. And when I look at MSTR versus Bitcoin, it's just really, really outperformed. It's way ahead of the game. So I thought, well, what else is good out there? Now, there's some miners. We've done really well. 2 risk reversals in CLSK, having done really well in the last month and a half or so in the community. So fantastic trades there. Also sold some coin puts, which I covered today, for a nice gain. Nothing crazy, but I didn't want to wait too long on those because of this position that I've got on here. So what I did was I put on a coin spread, a coin financed upside call spread, because look at coin versus Bitcoin. So we saw that one on MSTR. Look, it's gone completely bananas, right? It's gone completely bananas to the upside versus Bitcoin. What's another way I can play this? Well, the small miners are one way, but they're a little bit riskier. I think coin is a really interesting way to play this. And I thought, man, this thing has not gotten off the mat. So we're sitting right in here. MSTR's gone bananas. And I'm thinking this is where I want to place my bet in terms of that financed upside. And so we take another look at MSTR versus coin itself. What a move it's had. And we can see that unwinding here. So when I talked about this, we were sort of up in here. And sure enough, MSTR's pulled back 20, 25, 30 bucks, and coin has rallied 20 bucks. But the point being, I sort of saw this as the next potential catch-up trade within the Bitcoin complex. And so I did the 150. I'm going to show you right here. I did the $150 sale in June of next year. So it's pretty long term, right? You have to be comfortable with this sort of holding. And then I bought the 200 310 call spread. So I put that on for very, very little cost. It's when I put it on, it didn't cost anything. Right now it costs a little bit because it's had a bit of a move up with coin up around 200 bucks. But when I put it on, it was even money, which was kind of an amazing structure, amazing price for that structure. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be comfortable with this because of this MSTR 1x2. So what happened with the MSTR is it moved away from this structure. So MSTR got to 176. I put this on and I said, you know what? If it comes back down in here, I'm ready, number one, to own MSTR at 147, fine. Or it kind of sits around between 147 and 175, and we start to make some money as vol comes in and theta does its thing. But my favorite way for these trades to work out is we move away. So we had 180, a little bit of resistance around that 180 level. It blasted through, right? Coin said we're going to have none of that. We're going straight up. So coin just kept going up, which I love, because what happens, we got to around 195, 200, and I said, you know what? This is my opportunity. These puts that I'm short at the 162 level got down to 50 cents. I covered those. So now what happens is I don't have these short puts anymore. Let's take those off the screen. Now all I've got is long 176 puts, right? So this is deceiving because this should be the zero line. I have free puts at this point because I made enough on those short puts to cover the full cost of this structure, and I got it for a credit anyway. So I basically gave up my credit to own these puts. And now here we are in expiry week, and MSTR is starting to pull back a little bit. It's not looking that great, right? It paused at 191, not 192. But if this thing starts trucking down towards 165, 160, well, I've got these 170 puts just sitting there ready to protect my other position. So I'm going to make bank on these MSTR puts, which is going to make up, hopefully, for a decent chunk of this coin upside structure that's there. Now, these are only going to last to the end of the week, so we'll have to look at some other protection after that. But I'm feeling quite comfortable. I think coin really has a good chance to maybe get back up into that 250 range. And then, of course, if Bitcoin breaks out, then all bets are off, and it could go anywhere. But I kind of like this proxy right now. I'm gonna sit tight with it. Worst case scenario, I have to own coin at 150 at this point, but I'm ready to sit tight with it. I can react if it goes against me, but right now I'm happy with the structure. And in fact, I'm seeing, even with a very weak market today, the whole coin complex, the whole Bitcoin complex is actually kind of hanging in there. So I hope that gives you a kind of idea of, number one, how we can create sort of free puts. Now, these 1x2s can go down, they can go to the upside as well. So you can create free-ish structures either way if the stock cooperates, right? If the stock does what you think it's going to do. Now, these puts I've got on for free now, so they can just kick in to the downside. I'm just going to have to decide where I want to sell them. I could have sold them this morning at 250 and turned this whole thing into actually a nice win. But I'm just going to hold on to them because they serve as protection at this point. There's a very good likelihood that these will just close out the week worthless. And so nothing ventured, nothing gained, except the margin risk that I had on for this 1x2. But back when I was a market maker, I would put these kinds of trades on all the time because you may not make on very many of them, but every now and then the market will just tank or take off depending on what side you have this on, and these things will become gold. They will literally go from being worth nothing to worth like 10 or 15 bucks times how many contracts you've got. So you could turn these positions into gold. So I always like to try to build these 1x2 free put spreads over and over and try to have 3 or 4 of those in my pocket for when things, when the unexpected happens. And as we know, with markets, the unexpected can always happen. MSTR was trading at 230 a couple days ago, and I thought, okay, well, my puts are going to nothing. This morning it's 191. So anything can happen. This thing could drop $30 tomorrow on a big Bitcoin drop, and these things will be worth a fortune. So hope that gives you an idea of how to set something like this up. Again, look below in the description to where you can start to learn about stuff like this. I hope you enjoy that, and we'll see you in the next video.